to those of you who are just joining, my name is Mitra Anusharavani, and I am a member of the Oak Lodge Governance Project, and set some general ground rules for today. Katie Wilson, who is here to talk about CPOs from Clackamas County, is going to give a short presentation, and then we will have plenty of time for questions after that. Though if something pops up for you while she's speaking, feel free to put it in the chat, and I will go ahead and keep track of that and make sure that it gets answered later. We're going to keep the chat open unless it becomes like too much of its own beast. And everybody is muted. Just make sure, if you'd like to speak up, just make sure that you unmute. And we are going to record this meeting so other community members are able to access the same information. I'm going to pass it over to another member of OLGP, Eleanor Hunter, to talk a little bit about what specifically our group is about. Eleanor?
Hey, everybody, and welcome for people who have been joining us in the past, and welcome to new people who are here for the first time. So the Oak Lodge Governance Project got started about a year and a half ago. We got a $100,000 grant from Metro to basically answer the question, what are the financial and governance options for this particular area? And when we talk about this particular area, we're talking about Oak Lodge, which is the CPO, segue into today's talk, the CPO for Oak Grove and the CPO for Jennings Lodge. You put them together and you get Oak Lodge. The idea of incorporation has come up in this area for decades. And the chief question is always, what's it going to cost us? So we wanted to find out factual, data-driven material that would give us some understanding of what are the economic opportunities, the pros and cons, what's money coming in, what would it cost, what would the service level be, all those different things. We're looking at a variety of options. We have no answers. We are looking to answer some questions. There is the possibility of annexation. There's the possibility of incorporation. There's the possibility of staying the same. So we have a grant out there. This economic information is being gathered. We expect the study to be done end August, September, somewhere in there. In the meantime, on a monthly basis, on the second Saturday of the month, we're providing information sessions to try and help our community, our neighbors, which is estimated to be between 22 and 30,000 people, understand more about what the current governance situation is in this area. So again, Oak Lodge Governance Project is looking to find out answers and data-driven information about the economics and governance options in the area. And we're open to suggestions and involvement. And again, we're not, we don't have any answers. We're looking for more questions. So back to you, Mitra.
Yeah, thank you, Eleanor. And I'll also add that for those of you who, especially for those of you who were joining us for the first time, you might have additional information about, or additional questions about who we are and what we've been up to. And you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and a soon to be launching website, I should say. Mm-hmm. So please feel free to reach out via the email that was sent to you with the Zoom link, and we can connect you with additional answers if anything else comes up today that's not answered by this presentation. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to OLGP member Valerie Chapman to introduce Katie.
Morning, or I guess it's afternoon at this point. So hello to everyone. And as Mitra said, my name is Valerie Chapman. I've been a member of the steering committee, and it has been, it's my privilege to get to introduce Katie Wilson today. Katie is the Community Involvement Coordinator for Clackamas County. I'm really excited to see Katie's face today, because even though I have heard her name over and over again, I have never seen her. So that's kind of a nice improvement for someone. And I would say that as a member of the board of the Oak Grove Community Council, CPO, I also spent some time being the representative to the CPO Summit. And when I first started going to the CPO Summit, that's when I started to hear Katie Wilson's name over and over and over again. People would say, okay, Katie, we need to go to Katie. Katie's our go-to person. So it's really nice to see you, Katie. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to you. And we're really looking forward to hearing about, what are these things, these CPOs that we have?
Sure. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I am Katie Wilson. I am the liaison for the Community Involvement Program at Clackamas County. And so as part of that, I support the CPOs, which are community planning organizations, and hamlets, which are a unique program to Clackamas County. And I'll talk a little bit about both today, and then I'll take questions. So I know that there's probably a lot of questions. I have met a lot of people here in different capacities of my work, whether it be at the CPO or my face may look a little familiar to this community because I also used to do community engagement with Oak Lodge Sanitary District before it merged with the Water District. Now it's the utility district for your community. So if you're wondering where you may have seen my face, it may have been there also. So I'm so pleased to be here. And I don't have a big lengthy presentation, but I did want to start by sharing a little bit about CPOs. Community planning organizations are something that the county supports to support our Planning Goal 1 requirements. So Planning Goal 1 is the state planning goal, and it requires us to have community engagement. And so we achieve that requirement by having our community planning organizations. We have just under 30 now, and I'm going to share my screen to show a map of where all of the CPOs are. And I clearly have too many windows open. Here we go. Are you all looking at this map? Okay. So you can see all the different colors there. This shows all of unincorporated Clackamas County is eligible to be part of the CPO program. So we don't have CPOs in cities. Some functions that the CPOs serve within, that the cities have to serve some similar functions of CPOs are neighborhood associations. So if you recently or previously lived in an incorporated city, you may be familiar with neighborhood associations, and they are similar, but a little bit different. So our community planning organizations span the whole county. We do have some areas that are currently inactive, and we are working on that. But the primary function of community planning organizations is to provide a space for community members to come together in unincorporated Clackamas County and discuss land use, to be able to participate in that process. And so the ways that basically functions is each CPO has a board, and our county planning staff will share land use notifications with the appropriate CPO when there is a application or a project being considered in their community. And that allows the CPO members to come together and discuss the particular issue or project in their community, and to provide feedback to the planning staff, the planning commission, and the board of county commissioners on what their opinion is on that project. And a unique component to the CPO program is that CPOs are not considered agents of the county. And I say that to people, and sometimes they get their feathers ruffled because it sounds negative, but it's actually in everyone's best interest. And the reason for that is because there are times where the CPO provides feedback, and when all of the information is discussed, the planning commission or the board of county commissioners will make a determination, or our planning staff will make a determination that the CPO disagrees with. And because CPOs are not agents of the county, they are then allowed to be adverse to county land use decision making and appeal that process. And there's an appeals process for that. So it's really important that we maintain that separation so that CPOs have the ability to disagree and share that disagreement with the county and go through the appeals process. But in addition to land use, you may, if you have attended any of the CPO meetings in your community, you will know that both the Jennings Lodge CPO and the Oak Grove Community Council are very robust, and they communicate and discuss things well beyond land use, which is not uncommon. See, it's a great opportunity to have a community group and a community to talk about all kinds of issues. And so, in addition to supporting CPOs for their primary focus of land use, I also help support finding speakers, guest speakers from different county departments about all kinds of community issues. Most recently, we had, I think, staff out from our public health department to talk about vaccinations and the COVID pandemic and our continued emergency response to that. We've scheduled time with disaster management to discuss emergency preparedness. The county sheriff often visits CPOs to come out and discuss public safety. So there are all kinds of topics that are often discussed at CPOs, and that can be a really great way to bring in new members who maybe wouldn't read an agenda that talks about zoning and planning and get super psyched to come to a CPO meeting, but they might be excited to come hear about the sheriff's levy or where they can get their COVID vaccine, those types of topics. And so it's a great way to bring community together to help provide dialogue. And then maybe someone who wasn't super engaged about land use and planning might hear about a project and learn a little bit more about why that matters in their community. So that's one of the reasons why we support CPOs branching out and bringing in topics that are not necessarily directly connected to planning. So then the other community group that we support in unincorporated Clackamas County are hamlets. And hamlets are a unique program to Clackamas County. There are not other counties that have the hamlet program, at least not like ours. And that came out of a project that county administration partnered with the community on called Complete Communities. And the idea was to provide more robust community groups that are intended to be hubs for communities to talk about all kinds of issues, and then be advisory to the Board of County Commissioners on community issues. So because in unincorporated areas, you don't have a city council the same way that an incorporated community does, there seemed to be a missing step with how communities could connect with their Board of County Commissioners, who are your elected representatives. And so the hamlets are one way that we do that. We currently have 3 active hamlets in the county. It's the hamlet of Beaver Creek, the Malino hamlet, and the Stafford hamlet. And so hamlets are a little bit more robust in that we do provide more funding to hamlets because they are designed to tackle more issues and be more inclusive of a lot of different topics. A lot of our hamlets host community events, which I know some of our CPOs do too, and those are fabulous also. And then they report back to the Board of County Commissioners and to staff on issues that are specific to their communities, things that they're looking for the county to participate in or to push forward. And so those groups are just, they are funded a little bit differently to provide for those activities. We also have the capacity within our hamlet program to have a village. We don't currently have active villages, but there was one on the mountain at one point. It's no longer active, but it is an option available to unincorporated community members. And the difference between a hamlet and a village is that a village could go through the process to collect a tax for a specific project or topic or issue program in their community. We have actually never had that. Our village on the mountain didn't have that, but it is something that a village has the capacity to do per the county code. And so we have, and we also used to have a hamlet out in the Molalla area that is no longer active. So we have had several different CPOs look into the Hamlet program from time to time. We'd love to have more active Hamlets in the community. They are a great way for the board to stay connected. We have BCC members visit CPO and Hamlet meetings quite frequently. And Hamlets, our Hamlet members have recently started attending BCC meetings since the beginning of the year to give more specific updates to the board during public comment in the business meetings. You may notice that from time to time. But in a nutshell, that's our community planning programs and our Hamlet program overview. So I would love if I've skipped over something or there's burning questions to take a look at chat. I'll stop screen share unless we need to pull it up to answer a specific question, but I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions and dialogue. So
We actually already have a few questions geared up and ready to go.
awesome.
Can you talk more specifically about the funding for Hamlets?
Sure. So Hamlets, we recently changed the funding for Hamlets. We used to give a flat rate of $1,500 a year for each Hamlet, and in the past years we've changed that model because one size fits all just often doesn't fit community engagement really at all. Every community has a different need, and so we made that adjustment in the Hamlet program. And so the way it works now is each year each Hamlet creates a budget proposal. They go over the projects that they accomplished in the past year, and they put together a projected budget for what they need for the coming years. Their budget comes out of our staff budget and public and government affairs. So their budget proposals are reviewed by our director, Sue Hildick, and she reviews all three and discusses it with our budget manager, Kelly Lute, and then they go through the process of determining what we can afford to prioritize, and she reports back to the Hamlets each year with what their budget approval is, and then we work with them to adjust their planning if need be. I think most people are aware, it's been in the media, that the county is in a tight budget season, and so we have been working closely with our Hamlets this past year, or the past year and this coming year, to really tighten down our budgets to meet our needs, because budgeting is so challenging right now. And we hope that in the future we're able to help fund more of their projects.
Susan, I noticed that you unmuted yourself. Did you have a question?
Yes. Oh, I guess I did unmute myself again. Yeah, I had but why don't you go through your questions first? Because I'm learning more. I didn't know anything much about hamlets or villages, and I'm curious to hear more about that as a halfway step to see if they are heard more by the commissioners than a CPO might be heard. Because I think there's been a level of frustration, in not being able to help determine our own destiny and not really being heard.
Did you want me to answer that, Mitra?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so yes, the Hamlet program is definitely designed to provide more opportunity for direct dialogue with the board. Specifically, they give an annual report each year to the board, so they're provided time in a policy session to directly meet and discuss their community issues with the board. They also get 5 minutes at public comment rather than the 3 minutes that standard community members get. So you get a little bit more time if you were to visit a business meeting to share something specific to the Hamlet. That's only if they're discussing Hamlet issues. They don't get to come and talk about their personal comments for 5 minutes. But if they're officially speaking regarding Hamlet issues, they're each given 5 minutes to address the board. And like I said, while we do have super active CPOs throughout the county, the program's really designed to be more of that community conduit beyond land use. And so I would encourage you, if you have questions about how community members feel in that are participating in the hamlets, I'd love to connect you with some of our hamlet leaders, because they probably have more helpful insight as to your question as to whether or not they feel heard. But I do know from a staffing and support standpoint, there are just more opportunities for hamlets to share directly with the board, if that's helpful.
I noticed that Ed's hand is up. Ed, do you have a question? Ed Gronke, I should say.
Yes, I do. I have the general feeling that hamlets aren't really heard. Katie, can you give us some examples of hamlets making suggestions to the county commission that the county commission actually carried out?
Well, so I have a couple examples that come to mind. The Stafford Hamlet recently adopted their community vision plan. And if you're not familiar with the Stafford area, they're this unincorporated area that's kind of in between Westland, City of Lake Oswego, and Tualatin. And so they have been working directly with the county commissioners to come up with a plan for future development in their area. And it's been a long process for them, and it's been complicated because it includes, the different cities. And I think that if you spoke to some of the Stafford Hamlet leaders, they do feel happy with a lot of the work that they've done with the county commissioners and feel listened to in getting these agreements signed. It's been challenging. They didn't get 100% of their way, as is, and community involvement. I can never guarantee outcomes. I can only help support processes. Another example would be the hamlet of Beaver Creek came to the county and were extremely concerned about an inactive neighboring CPO. And we worked with them to adjust their boundaries to merge the Karis CPO within their boundaries. And that's a process they had to engage the Board of County Commissioners on, because boundary changes are something the board approves. And so they worked directly with the board with the help of staff, and we went through an engagement process. They shared their perspectives and their desire to merge their boundaries, and the board approved that. So those are just a couple examples. I can never guarantee that you're going to get exactly what you ask for when you engage the board. But I do hope that we can work together and establish trust that I will help connect you and provide a process for you to connect with the board and county decision makers.
Penny, I see that you have a question. You said, Katie, the Hamlet budget was previously at 1,500. Since that was changed, what typically has been a typically approved budget, and what kinds of priorities are approved typically, which you kind of just talked about a little bit?
Sure. So this year, all three CPOs received a $1,500 budget. In previous years, they had been a little bit more. And one was actually a little bit less because they didn't need their full 1,500. And so I think the most that's been approved, I think, was just under $3,000 for the Stafford Hamlet one year. And so projects that show up on their budget proposals are a lot of engagement with their community. They're looking for support that we help with mailings, social media, and website support. All three hamlets host some sort of community event in their area. So they ask for funding to help support outreach and operation support for their events. The Stafford Hamlet has their Stafford Family Fest each year. In the fall, the Molino Hamlet hosts a community barbecue and cruise in the summer, and the Hamlet of Beaver Creek actually has a few smaller events. They have a tree lighting, they have a summer Stars in the Park. There's a park within their community that they utilize for quite a few events. And so they look for support for those types of things. Signage, more permanent signage than just like the CPO A-frames that we see a lot of CPOs use. Some of our hamlets put up more specific signage as to welcoming neighbors when they enter their hamlet. What else? There has been the Stafford Hamlet, when they did their CVP, they had some fees associated with that because they brought in some support, contracted support staff to help them with some of that process. So those are some basic expenses. I'm trying to think if there's other things that are different. Meeting expenses, of course, we all know CPOs get $150 a year, and it's not lost on me that that doesn't spread very far. So you know that often I know we're all meeting on Zoom right now, but in pre-COVID, most of our groups meet in person in community spaces. Some of those spaces have fees associated with them. So hamlets, often included in their budget, is always the operational costs of hosting their meetings. And those meeting expenses often include rentals, PO boxes, those types of things are included in their operational expenses.
Katie, I have a follow-up question, if that's all right.
Sure.
So, we are lucky in the sense that JLCPO and the Oak Grove Community Council have relatively robust CPOs. And relatively speaking to the larger population of this area, 22 to 30,000 folks, I mean, you're still talking about just a regular few dozen at each meeting. So is there, is there staff support for outreach? I know that there's a lot of support you're able to offer in terms of engaging those few dozen folks that show up, but what sort of outreach support does the county offer in order for us to lift up those organizations and give a broader appeal?
Right. So we have struggled to find ways to increase participation at CPO meetings. And part of that is because it's a program that was created in 1970 and times have changed. And so, and I don't know that we've necessarily done a really great job of keeping up with the times as far as supporting our community groups to continue to do the good work that you do. But most recently, one of the things we've noticed is that we see increased participation across the county with the inclusion of Zoom and virtual platforms to keep people engaged. So one of the things that we're just now rolling out is a mechanism to provide county-funded Zoom licenses for CPOs and hamlets to be able to host these on their own. During COVID, I know that the Oak Grove Community Council and the Jennings Lodge CPO, because you guys are amazing and have an amazing volunteer base, you've been hosting those meetings on your own because you have people that are willing to donate their time. It's amazing. That's great. But also we should be supporting that. And so we have come up with a mechanism to provide Zoom access to CPOs and hamlets. So that's one way that we are trying to increase participation. But we know that across the county, we have legacy volunteers, which are people that have been doing this for a really long time. And folks are facing burnout. And I'm well aware of it. We hear about it, for people touching bases with all of our CPOs, that we need fresh perspectives. We need fresh volunteers. We need folks to come forward to bring more diversity to the program. And we're struggling to find a way to do that. We'd love to support social media platforms for CPOs. We don't have a mechanism to do that across the board, but I have been meeting with different community leaders as CPOs are starting to explore that as a mechanism to share information about what's happening at their meetings. We have some CPOs that are building websites to be able to share that information, which of course, the greatest way to get folks to a website is social media. That's how we do it at the county, and it is the most successful way. Most people don't go directly to a website without getting a suggestion somewhere first. And we know that one of the main places people look for information in this day and age is on social media. So we're looking at ways that we can help support those tools for our CPOs. And then also exploring, are there changes in the way we can just fundamentally run the program so that it is more inclusive. We have recently built at the county an Office of Equity. We've hired a staff. And so part of their work is to do an environmental scan of who is in Clackamas County, who it is we're serving, so that we can better serve all of our constituents. And hopefully out of that work, we'll learn more about who is in unincorporated Clackamas County and how we can better communicate with the folks living in unincorporated Clackamas County and engage them. And then use that information to redesign how we support the CPOs and hamlets and how those groups work. So we're working on it. I would say it's a work in progress. We don't have all the answers, and I'm always here to listen if there are things specific to your community that we can do to support.
Great, thanks, Katie. I know
Sure.
Jane had a question.
Katie, I not through a social media, but actually on the My Clackamas newspaper magazine.
Mhm.
Came out, I
Jane
was reading-
can barely hear you. Can you talk louder?
No, I can turn up the sound.
Yeah, can barely hear you. It's not going to come out on the recording.
Okay. Turn that up. Thank you, Eleanor.
That's better.
Reading the My Clackamas magazine that came out, I noticed you had a piece in there. You were quoted in the piece, and it had to do with the Carious CPO and the hamlet of, where was it?
Hamlet of Beaver Creek.
Beaver Creek. So they went about combining them in that the county commissioners actually redrew the boundaries. And so now Carious area no longer has a CPO, and they are included within an entire hamlet of Beaver Creek. Is that how?
Yes.
It works?
Yes.
How-
So the
how long
Hamlet.
did-
Oh, go ahead.
How
Sorry, I
long
didn't
did
mean
that
to interrupt you.
process actually take?
That process took longer than other boundary changes, partially because COVID happened right when we were getting ready to launch our engagement process for that. And so we had to regroup. But we have done other boundary changes that they take about between 3 to 6 months, depending on all of the issues surrounding that area. When we went out to the community, everyone was supportive, so that we didn't need to circle back with more information or ask more probing questions. If the issue was more controversial, it may take more time because it would require more time engaging the community to really understand what the community needs are. But the way that we did that particular process, because we were socially distanced at the time, is we did pre-COVID. We hosted a couple meetings and polled the community, the existing community members, and then we had planned an open house that, of course, was not a good idea once the pandemic started. So we shifted to electronic survey. And so we sent out a postcard to the entire Carious area, inviting them to participate in this electronic survey where we asked a lot of the questions we would have asked at an open house, and also collected information for folks who wanted to serve on the board if they were merged with the Hamlet of Beaver Creek. And so we went through that process. Then we took it to the Board of County Commissioners. And sometimes it can take a little bit of time to get on the agenda with the board, depending on how full their agendas are. And then they heard from community members and from myself, and they made that determination. So that process took about a year, which we've not had previous boundary changes take that long, but it just, because of all of the challenges of these unprecedented times, that one took a little bit longer.
Yeah, we have 2 questions in the docket. The first is, what do appeals processes look like for CPOs? What types of things go to appeal? And can you share some examples of how they've worked out?
So I am not usually involved in the appeals process. But what would happen is the CPO is notified of the outcome of a land use decision, and then they have the option to appeal. And CPOs, there's normally a fee associated with appealing a land use decision. CPOs that the county waives that fee for CPOs. So that's something that is a benefit to participating in that process through your CPO as opposed to doing it as an individual. And then it goes to an appeals process, and all the parties are offered an opportunity to provide their perspectives, and it's determined by a hearings officer. And if you have more specific legal questions about that, I don't want to misspeak. So I would encourage you to reach out to Jennifer Hughes, who is the planning director for Clackamas County. She could definitely share more specific details about the process. But the basic process is we work through a series of notifications, and CPOs are afforded that without the fees associated with it that individuals have. But Jennifer could definitely give more specific details as to each step, and also how that's working now that things are remote and all of that. So I don't know if the timelines have shifted and whatnot. So you definitely want to speak to Jennifer if you had specific issues.
Grover, I noticed your hand up. Did you have a follow-up to that?
I do actually, and thank you, Kitty, for that lead in, but I'll fill in a little bit more. First of all, I want to call attention to a great article that Tom has in the current Clackamas Review that covers that piece, including the piece of property, 16 acres here in Jennings Lodge, that is now clear cut in a housing development. So we did get to appeal, but the problem that doesn't speak to, no fault of yours, Katie, is that you have to have an attorney to go through any of those appeal processes. And then it got appealed, and then it went all the way to the state Supreme Court, but we had to have people who were willing to put up the funding. And it was not the county. The county didn't go with us on that. So it's not the county's fault because we didn't agree, but it's part of the fuller picture that yes, you can appeal for free, haha, except no one goes and appeals without an attorney from my understanding. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that follow-up, Grover. I know a number of folks on here have some pretty specific examples of things that have been appealed or been unhappy with. So over the course of some years in terms of how CPOs have been represented in land use.
Sure.
Let's see, another question. Can you tell us about how neighborhood associations work in Portland or Milwaukee? I think trying to get the heart of the difference between.
Sure. So each city is a little bit different in how they operate their neighborhood associations. So, for example, in I don't know that much about what happens in Milwaukee, but I know Portland uses their neighborhood associations similarly to how CPOs function as representatives of their communities. And so they have meetings very similar to how the CPOs have. I believe Portland provides more staff support to their neighborhood associations than our CPO program, because you may notice it's just me over here supporting CPOs. We do have a staff in public and government affairs that I can lean on for support, but as far as community liaisons, we currently only have one for the program. So Portland does have a larger staff that they devote to community engagement around land use. But each city operates theirs a little bit differently. So, but those CPOs or the neighborhood associations would provide input to their city councils or city commissions similarly. And they have a planning process within the city that is probably very similar to the county. But of course, being a smaller city, there's less people to represent. So, or less neighborhood associations to represent. So it's probably, I would say they probably get to have more time, more face time in front of their commission than our CPOs do.
So if folks in our area were curious about becoming a hamlet, what's the process?
Reach out to me and let's talk about it. I would love to have a dialogue about what that looks like. I'd love to connect you with hamlet leaders from our existing hamlets so you can ask real questions about what their experiences have been in the program. And then we would need to go through an engagement process to find out if that is something that the community is interested in. We'd have to take a community vote, and then we would take that to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption. Depending on how everyone in this community feels, if this is something that you guys want to explore, we'd have to create a custom engagement plan just specific to your area. And I'd be curious to see what that looks like, how interested community members are. And then I couldn't speak specifically to what our process would be without talking details, but we would need to have some time together to really talk about what the specific needs are to the Oak Lodge area and who would want to be included in that hamlet. Would you want it to be all of Oak Lodge, or would it be a specific facet of the area? And talk boundaries of what you envision for a hamlet in the area, and we would go from there for an engagement process, and that would inform next steps.
So an additional question, kind of going back a little bit. So you mentioned that, you are the outreach and engagement person for the CPOs and hamlets. So
Yes.
what's the population of folks in Clackamas County then that are looking to you to be that person for them?
As far how many community members do I support?
Yeah, I mean, that would be represented by CPOs and hamlets.
Oh, well,
thousands, right?
yes. I mean, it is intended for our CPO and hamlet programs to support all of unincorporated Clackamas County. Now, we all know that our CPOs and hamlet meetings are not always fully representative of all of the people in unincorporated Clackamas County, but that is the intent, for us to find a way for this program to do a better job of representing all those folks. That's a lot of people in Clackamas County. And we are working on ways to do a better job of supporting that. Our department has recently redefined a framework for community engagement, and we're working in partnership with our Office of Equity, because we know our community engagement program is not fully inclusive or accessible to all of our residents. And so we're working on ways to do that and ways to support that, because it's a lot for one person, and it's frankly not reasonable to think that one person is going to be able to carry out all of that engagement work. So we are working on ways that we can leverage our full department, leverage staff in other departments to work together so that we are doing a better job of serving and engaging community.
So let me ask you this then: assuming that our area maintains status quo for the indefinite future, what are
Sure.
things that we can do to help you in that quest to increase our representation and voice in the county?
I would encourage you, as we move forward with the work to scan the community, to encourage folks to participate. When you see surveys, when you see information come out, to share with your neighbors, to encourage people, even if they've been discouraged in the past, to participate, to really try again. We know that we just did outreach for the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. And we did a little poll during those meetings to where the community members voted for representatives on their new district advisory committee. And we saw in the polling of just those members who came to that meeting that the best way to learn about things going on is word of mouth. And we're in a day and age, especially now that we're still remote, for a lot of our engagement, where we've been exploring all kinds of virtual tools. But the old school way of just chatting with your neighbor over a fence, please, 6 feet apart still, but it works. People trust people. And so hearing from a neighbor that you trust about something that you want to be engaged, that you want them to be engaged in, is still really important. We know that mailings work. They're expensive though. And so we don't have the capacity to do them all the time. But to make sure that they're keeping up to date on reading their materials that come from the county, and asking questions when they have questions. I'm a resource and I don't have all the answers, but I will help connect you with whoever I can to help you get the information you're looking for. So I would just say that the greatest thing we can do is to continue to ask questions and continue to encourage more neighbors to participate in the programs we do have, because I can advocate for more funding to programs when we see that there's participation, when we see that there's interest. And so I really encourage you to continue to encourage more of your neighbors to participate in the processes that do exist, and to give feedback when we ask for it about what didn't work, what we could do better. That information is so important. To stay engaged on social media, I would encourage your existing CPOs to stay active on social media. And if there's things I can do to help that are, small scale projects, I'm happy to help with that. And to come to business meetings and give public comment directly to your Board of County Commissioners. I know that's not super convenient, but now that you can do it virtually, it is a little bit easier. And they need to hear from their community members. And they still are hearing mostly from the loudest members, the loudest people in the room. And those aren't always the people that are the most representative of their community. So I encourage you to give it a shot, be brave, give your feedback, and be persistent and diligent. And I'm here to support you if there's any way I can help you with that.
Thanks, Katie. We have 3 questions in the docket, and I just want to be mindful
Okay.
of time. We are at 12. We're just a little over 12.
Okay.
So maybe these 3 questions, and then we'll see where we're at.
Okay.
Ed Gronke.
Katie, thank you very much for coming. I know you're very interested in being as helpful as you can. I've been involved with CPOs and land use issues for more than 40 years. So far as I know, I don't think it's changed. I don't believe that a hamlet has any standing in land use issues unless the CPOs actually take action to give the hamlet that standing. Am I not correct?
I'm glad you asked that question, Ed. So you're right. There's a couple different ways that our hamlets take care of that. The hamlet of Beaver Creek has merged their CPO and hamlet together. So they conduct that business together. They are one and the same. The hamlet of Beaver Creek is also the CPO. In the Malino area, they have their CPO and their hamlet. They meet on the same night, but they adjourn one of the they do their CPO business, then they adjourn their CPO and they host their hamlet meeting. They just do it all in the same time span for convenience sake for community members. And in the Stafford area is a little bit different in that their CPO boundary is actually a little bit different currently than their hamlet boundary, and that's on their goals to remedy that. They'd like to have the same boundaries for both their hamlet and CPO in the future. So they do the same thing, but they do sometimes have some members that come because their CPO is a little bit larger than their hamlet currently, that'll come just for the portion of their CPO meetings. But you're right, the way that the hamlets are set up, unless they take that action to officially combine their purposes or to rewrite their bylaws for that, the hamlets are not designed to do land use. The CPOs are. All 3 of our hamlets have taken action already to do that.
Thank you very much. Now, a follow-up on this.
Sure.
Is, so far as I know, the biggest frustration in our communities has to do with land use planning, with policing, and with street maintenance. The CPOs really are simply advisory to the county commission. My experience in land use issues is when the county refers a land use issue to a CPO, it has already been thoroughly examined by county staff, and it obviously meets their requirements before they ever refer it to the CPO. So the only thing that the only comment the CPO can make to the county, which is really of any meaning, is that we really don't feel this fits into our neighborhood. And normally the county simply ignores those. Am I not correct?
I can't I could not confirm that that is the intended process. But I have heard uh, complaints that are similar in nature, and that a lot of CPOs feel that they're not given enough time to provide what they feel is adequate feedback in the land use process. I do know that our planning staff has explained to me that a lot of the process is not something that they have a lot of control over, because there are state laws that require it to happen a certain way. But I would say it's not any staff's intent to have a false level of participation from the community. But if you feel that way, that is something that you should share. And I am saddened that you feel that you're not being heard, and that you feel that the process isn't helpful. And I would encourage you to speak out and share that feedback. And if you wanted to send an email, I'd be happy to forward that on your behalf to the board or county staff, however would be appropriate. But I don't work in the planning department, so I couldn't speak intelligently about what their process is.
Thanks, Katie. Up next is Chips and then Edred.
Sure.
Thank you, Katie, for coming to speak to us.
Of course.
We're all interested in CPOs. CPOs, to me, have been excellent forums for discussion, and I've been involved in them for the last decade, as many people here have, and they have been a good source for people to communicate and talk about issues. And I would hope that they could continue something like that to do that. There is some confusion, however, because many people who come to the CPOs feel like there is actually they have some kind of power to actually make decisions, to do anything in their community, which obviously, and I think as you've expressed, they really don't. All they can do is send a letter to the board. I think Grover has expressed pretty well of the process that takes place when a CPO disagrees with the board, and the board says, certainly you can appeal a land use decision. The Oak Grove CPO has done that several times. We've disagreed with the board, and the board has suggested that we can appeal it. We've learned, as Grover did and as Jennings Lodge did, that appeal is very expensive and seldom. In fact, in our understanding, we don't believe a hearings officer has ever changed a decision. So really, it's almost kind of a smoke and mirrors thing when it comes to decision making. Although, like I said, CPOs are good forums for discussion, but they really shouldn't be discussed in any sense that there is the possibility to make a land use decision, or to change a land use decision, or to make any kind of decision that involves our local community. CPOs are as I said, and as I think, as we all know, are pretty good forums. We have written many, many letters to the board to ask them to explain decisions, change land use decisions, do something to support our community when our community was very adamant against certain decisions, and that really never has happened. So I think it's important that we kind of keep the context there and deal with the fact that CPOs are a forum for getting together. It's a good place to discuss issues, but it's not a place where anything can actually be changed.
I didn't hear a question, so I think you were just sharing information. Okay, I just wanted to be sure.
All right, and then we have time for one more question from Edred. Thank you for your patience.
Unmute myself. There we are. Hi. I'm interested in the social media, expanding an ability of a CPO or an organization to access social media easier through help with the county. And I wanted to get a kind of vision of what that would be if it got fully implemented. You said that it's kind of a process going on. And I'd like to understand what that process is and what the barriers are that you're running into that makes it not happen,
Okay.
It could be time, I don't know what that is, but and how, in principle, how big a piece of being connected to the community do you believe that could be if it were fully implemented? In other words, one of the things that people run into is how do we get like 50 or 60 people at a CPO meeting with a group of, that representing upwards of 25,000 people. So you'd like to change that ratio in some way. And how big a piece of that would be the social media element?
So some of the challenges with social media are that if you were to, for example, if you were to set up your own channel on Facebook, folks, in order to keep people engaged on social media, you have to have updated content. And so you need someone who's devoted to, from your CPO, to really be committed to sharing updated content. We know, we've learned this, as we've explored this at the county level. If you don't keep up-to-date content coming out of your social media, then people stop following you. And so it's only as good as your updated content. So when it comes down to volunteerism, someone who's willing to really take on that work. And then social media, often the most successful social media is used as a tool to drive folks to then more complete information. So we know on social media, folks tend to not spend a lot of time reading any one specific thing. You want to have short snippets of information, a video or a short blurb that then drives them to another website or another resource where they can, if they're really truly interested, then they'll spend a little bit more time engaging. And so it really is a piece of the puzzle, right? So you want to use social media to grab people's attention and share information, but it's not usually a place where people spend a lot of time. And so you need to have whoever's going to be working on your social media either needs to be connected with someone who's working on your website, or is knowledgeable enough to leverage resources on other agencies' websites, because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel if the information is out there somewhere else. So, but that's a task, and it can be time consuming. And so the ways that some of our CPOs are dealing with that, because they don't have the capacity to necessarily host their own social media, is their board members are utilizing the different social media groups like Facebook. I live in Oregon City, so mine is like Oregon City Chit Chat, or there's a couple different ones. They're sharing information in social media groups like that just as individuals, because then they don't have to maintain content, but they're targeting their specific neighborhoods. So that is one way that we are working to solve some of those issues. We've had some success on Nextdoor, but we know that Nextdoor doesn't necessarily have the most diverse following. So there's limitations within that. But the great thing about Nextdoor, if you don't have any experience with it, is when you sign up, it is meant to target hyper-local groups. So you can it's literally neighborhoods that you can target on Nextdoor. So that is promising. And so, but we know that social media is a way to engage a younger demographic. It could possibly, if you did have the capacity to host your own Facebook or Instagram or Twitter channel, you would have the opportunity to ask your followers to weigh in on information outside of a meeting. I know that a lot of CPO bylaws don't allow for absentee voting, but it certainly is a way to get the feel of the room, so to speak, to understand what's going on in your community, to share information that's going to happen at your meeting. It's a great place to notice meetings. You can do events and things on social media. You could do a Facebook Live event out in your community and share videos of specific things that you want community members to see. So there's a lot of value and information sharing that can happen on social media. But I would say the biggest challenge is finding a community member or a community team who's willing to really champion that and consistently stay on top of social media content for your group.
Could the county support educating individuals how to set these things up and provide technical, like IT support or something like that to help?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people would like to do that, but they simply don't know how.
Sure.
And it's just a confusing miasma, you know, and while having some experts available who are just very proactive in catalyzing that process might really help and not require anything, you know, not require a lot of money, just somebody who could take that responsibility.
Sure. That is really great suggestion, and we have been looking into it, but I really appreciate your feedback, and asking questions like that is a great way for me to show county leadership that there is a desire and an ask for that service. So we are looking into it, and I'll keep you posted as we explore more.
So I'm going to jump in here because we are
Sure.
out of time for today. And like I said in the chat, there's a number of unanswered questions still hanging out there. I am thrilled that this community is so engaged with this issue. And we will for sure follow up with answers via the email list. And Eleanor, I'm going to pass it off to you to close us out. Katie, thank you.
You're welcome. I did put my email in the chat. If anyone wants to send me, if you had a question or something comes up later and you want to chat, please reach out.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, so much for being here. And again, join us next month. It'll be on June 12th. Again, it's always the second Saturday of the month, where our own Leah Robbins will be speaking to us about transportation in this area and what it's meant to this area and how it's changed, how this area has grown. So Katie, thank you again so much for information on what CPOs are and aren't. And we look forward to seeing you all in about a month, and happy Memorial Day and happy times until then. And keep looking for us in Clackamas Review. All right. Take care, everyone.